I am Maya, 34 years old, and my husband thought he could secretly mortgage my house to fund his arrogant white brother-in-law. When Marcus packed his bags for a sudden business trip to Chicago, our 8-year-old daughter Zuri pulled on my sleeve and begged to fly out and surprise him. I booked the next flight out, thinking we would share a nice family weekend in the city. But when that luxury hotel door opened, I froze. The people waiting inside and the paperwork sitting on the coffee table revealed a betrayal far worse than any mistress. Before I share exactly how I legally dismantled their entire lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you know that protecting your peace means cutting toxic people out for good. The flight to Chicago was filled with Zuri coloring pictures for her father and me, smiling at her excitement. Marcus had been stressed lately, claiming his finance job was demanding more travel. I thought a surprise visit would lift his spirits. We arrived at the luxury hotel downtown, just as the afternoon sun hit the glass skyscrapers. Zuri held my hand tightly, bouncing on her heels, as we rode the gold-paneled elevator up to the penthouse level. I knocked on the heavy wooden door of his suite, expecting a tired Marcus in a dress shirt and loosened tie. Instead, the door swung open to reveal my husband holding a crystal flute of expensive champagne. He did not look tired. He looked horrified. Before he could even speak, Zuri yelled surprise and tried to wrap her arms around his waist. Marcus stiffened, stepping back so quickly he nearly spilled his drink. I looked past him into the massive suite. The room was practically overflowing with people who had no business being in Chicago. Sitting on the plush velvet sofa was my mother-in-law Vivian, wearing her Sunday best. Next to her was my sister-in-law Chloe, laughing loudly. And lounging in the center chair with his feet propped up on the mahogany coffee table was Liam, Chloe's white husband, holding a thick cigar. Vivian immediately set her glass down, her face twisting into a scowl the moment she saw Zuri. She stood up and crossed her arms. "Why would you bring a child to a business celebration, Maya? This is completely inappropriate." Before I could process why my entire in-law family was throwing a party in my husband's hotel room, Marcus grabbed my upper arm. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into my skin as he forcefully pulled me out into the hallway and pulled the door halfway shut behind him. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, keeping his voice low so the people inside could not hear. "Are you out of your mind?" I shook his hand off my arm, my shock rapidly turning into cold clarity. "We came to surprise you. You said you were here for back-to-back finance meetings. Why is your mother here? And why is Liam smoking a cigar in your suite?" Marcus ran a hand over his face, looking everywhere but my eyes. "It is a business trip. Liam is pitching his new tech startup to investors here. I came to vouch for his financials. We were just celebrating because he secured his seed funding. You need to take Zuri and go back to Atlanta right now. You are going to ruin this for him." I stared at the man I had been married to for 9 years. I pushed past him, pushing the door wide open, and walking straight into the suite with Zuri right behind me. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. Liam did not even bother to take his feet off the table. He took a long drag of his cigar and let out a breathless chuckle. "Well, look who decided to crash the party. Marcus told us you were back home managing your little online consulting blog. It is a shame you flew all this way, Maya. This celebration is for the people actually bringing real money into the family. It is not really a place for housewives." I ignored his blatant disrespect. My eyes were locked on the coffee table right beneath Liam's expensive leather shoes. Sitting next to the champagne bucket was a thick stack of legal documents. I have always had an eye for details. It is what makes me so good at my actual job, the job none of them knew about. The bold print at the top of the document read "Commercial Loan Agreement and Collateral Pledge." I walked closer, ignoring Vivian's sharp gasp of disapproval. I looked down at the paper. The loan was for $2 million issued to Horizon Tech, Liam's supposed startup. But it was the collateral section that made my blood run cold. Listed right there in black and white was the address of my home in Atlanta. The beautiful 6-bedroom house that I had paid for entirely in cash 3 years ago. Because Marcus had insisted his pride as a black man would be wounded if his friends knew his wife bought the house, I had allowed his name to be placed on the deed alongside mine. I had done it out of love, out of a desire to build him up. And now he had secretly forged my signature on a secondary mortgage document to hand $2 million to a man who openly mocked me. Chloe marched up to me, snatching the document off the table and holding it against her chest. "Stop snooping," she snapped. "Liam is building a tech empire. Marcus is just doing what a good brother does by backing him up. It is not a big deal." "Not a big deal?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. "Marcus just leveraged the roof over his daughter's head to fund a man who has never held a steady job in his life." Liam stood up, towering over me with that familiar, arrogant smirk he reserved especially for me. "Calm down, Maya. There is no need to pull the angry black woman routine. You would not understand how venture capital works. Marcus is a financial director. He knows what he is doing. You are just living off his paycheck anyway, so I suggest you let the men handle the wealth building." The sheer audacity of his racism and entitlement hung in the air. He truly believed he was superior, and my husband was standing right there letting him say it. Vivian stepped between us, her chin raised high, looking at me with pure disdain. "Liam is absolutely right," she declared. "Marcus is the head of your household. If he decides to use his property to uplift his sister's husband, that is his right. It is family tradition to support the men who do the real work. You should be grateful Marcus provides for you and Zuri. Stop being so petty and narrow-minded. Leave these men alone so they can celebrate their success." I looked at my mother-in-law, a woman who went to church every Sunday, but harbored more malice than anyone I knew. I looked at Chloe, who was smiling smugly from the sidelines. I looked at Liam, who felt completely entitled to the wealth I had secretly built. And finally, I looked at Marcus. He refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to stare at the floor like a coward. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of the emotional breakdown they were waiting for. In my line of work, panic is the enemy. I handle crises for global corporations, dismantling threats before they even hit the news. These people thought they were playing chess with a housewife. They had no idea they had just declared war on a ghost who owned the entire board. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and quickly snapped a photo of the signature page Chloe was clutching before she could pull it away. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, taking a step toward me. I simply smiled. I reached down and took Zuri's small hand in mine. "We are leaving, sweetie. Daddy is too busy giving away our house to play right now." I turned back to the room, my voice calm, chillingly polite. "Congratulations on your funding, Liam. And Marcus, enjoy the rest of the champagne. Just make sure you pay for it in cash." Without another word, I walked out of the suite, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. I did not look back as I guided Zuri down the hallway and back into the elevator. When we got outside, I hailed a taxi to take us straight back to the airport. Once Zuri was safely buckled into the back seat and distracted by a game on her tablet, I opened my encrypted messaging app. I typed a quick message to my lead financial operative back in Atlanta. "Initiate immediate liquidation protocol. Freeze all secondary accounts linked to Marcus. Contact the holding bank and block the outgoing wire transfer for the Horizon Tech loan immediately. Report the collateral signature as fraudulent." The reply came back in less than a minute. "Protocol initiated. Wire blocked. Cards frozen." I leaned my head against the cold window of the taxi, watching the Chicago skyline blur past us. I could picture it perfectly. Right about now, Marcus would be calling for the check to pay for their lavish room service and that imported champagne. He would confidently hand the waiter his sleek metallic credit card, the one linked to an account he thought he controlled. And right in front of his arrogant, racist brother-in-law and his cruel mother, that card was going to decline. They thought they had won. They thought they had secured their future using my money. But they were about to learn that when you try to steal a crown from a queen, you do not just lose your hands. You lose your entire kingdom. I flew across the country to surprise my husband in his Chicago hotel room, expecting to find him exhausted from back-to-back finance meetings. Instead, when the suite door swung open, I completely froze. He was not alone, and he was not working. The people lounging inside his room and the legal documents sitting on the coffee table revealed a financial betrayal so deep it threatened to leave my daughter and me homeless. Before I tell you exactly how I smiled, walked away, and legally dismantled their entire lives by dinner time, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind a toxic family who really holds the power. Liam leaned back into the plush velvet cushions of the hotel suite sofa. He did not bother to stand or even adjust his posture when I walked in. Instead, he casually lifted his legs and dropped his expensive leather loafers right onto the center of the mahogany coffee table, pushing aside a silver champagne bucket to make room. He took a long, slow drag from his thick cigar, blowing a cloud of smoke toward the crystal chandelier above us. His pale blue eyes traced over my travel-worn clothes with unmistakable amusement. He looked me up and down, analyzing me the way someone might look at an uninvited solicitor who had somehow slipped past the lobby security desk. "Well, Maya," he said, his voice dripping with that effortless, unearned confidence he carried everywhere. "Marcus told us you were tied up back in Atlanta managing that little consulting blog of yours. It is a real shame you dragged yourself and the kid all the way out here for nothing." He gestured lazily with his cigar, pointing toward the scattered crystal glasses and open bottles. "You see, this is an exclusive celebration for a $3 million investment. We are finalizing the seed funding for my new tech startup today. This environment is for the people bringing actual capital into the family. It is not exactly a venue for housewives to bring their toddlers." I kept my face entirely impassive. In my line of work dealing with corporate disasters and hostile takeovers, I had faced down arrogant men in boardrooms across the globe. Liam was nothing but a textbook cliché. He was a mediocre white man, wearing a designer suit bought with someone else's money, entirely convinced of his own supreme intellect. What fascinated me was not Liam but my husband. I turned my gaze to Marcus. The man who demanded absolute respect and submission within the walls of our home in Atlanta was currently standing by the minibar, looking like a scolded intern. Marcus, a senior financial director, was shrinking in the presence of his sister's husband. He offered no defense for me. He made no move to correct Liam's blatant disrespect toward his wife and daughter. He just nervously adjusted his tie and stared at the patterned carpet, wishing he could disappear. My mother-in-law Vivian sat adjacent to Liam, sipping her champagne. She watched me with a victorious glint in her eye, clearly enjoying my supposed humiliation. But my attention drifted away from their faces and settled on the coffee table directly beneath Liam's resting feet. Next to the ice bucket, partially covered by an empty glass, lay a thick stack of legal documents. I have spent the last 10 years dissecting corporate contracts, reading between the lines to save billionaires from their own catastrophic mistakes. I can speed read a binding agreement upside down in a moving vehicle. Scanning a document on a hotel coffee table was effortless. The bold lettering at the top of the page commanded my attention immediately. Commercial loan agreement and collateral pledge. Below that, the principal amount was typed out clearly. $3 million. The borrower was listed as Horizon Tech, which I knew was the name of Liam's imaginary startup company. A company that had produced absolutely nothing of value in its 2 years of existence. But it was the collateral section that made the blood freeze in my veins. There, printed in crisp black ink, was the exact address of my home in Buckhead. The beautiful, sprawling 6-bedroom estate in Atlanta that I had purchased 3 years ago. I had paid for that house entirely in cash, using the dividends from my hidden corporate shares. I wanted my daughter to grow up with a backyard that felt like a private park. I wanted her to know what true security felt like. But because I was married to a man whose ego was as fragile as glass, I made a tactical error. Marcus had constantly complained that his pride as a black man would be destroyed if his peers knew his wife bought their mansion. He needed to feel like the provider, the king of his castle. So out of profound love and a misguided desire to build his confidence, I allowed his name to be placed on the deed. I let him pretend to the world that his financial acumen had secured our lavish lifestyle. Now I was staring at the undeniable proof of his betrayal. Marcus had secretly taken out a massive secondary mortgage on our fully paid-off home. He had leveraged the roof over his daughter's head, the safety of our family, to hand $3 million to a grifter. He had risked everything I built just to buy the approval of his white brother-in-law. He wanted to feel like a big-shot venture capitalist, throwing money at a tech startup to impress Liam and Vivian. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. Marcus had somehow bypassed the joint consent clauses, using his financial credentials to push the massive loan through a private lender. He was literally betting our home on a man who was currently blowing cigar smoke in my face and telling me I did not belong in the room. I did not scream. I did not throw the champagne bucket across the room. Emotional outbursts are the refuge of the powerless, and I held more power in my single phone than everyone in this hotel suite combined. I simply stepped further into the room, my heels sinking into the thick carpet, my eyes locked entirely on the contract beneath Liam's shoes. My total silence must have unsettled them. They expected a breakdown. They expected me to cry and beg Marcus to explain what was happening. They wanted me to cause a scene so they could validate their belief that I was unstable and unreasonable. When I did not offer them the dramatic performance they desired, Chloe decided to interject. She stood up from her chair, smoothing down the front of her expensive silk dress, a dress I recognized because my husband's credit card had undoubtedly paid for it. Chloe crossed her arms defensively, stepping closer to Liam as if she needed to protect him from my quiet presence. "Sister," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary tone she used whenever she was about to say something venomous. "Liam is the elite of Silicon Valley. He is a genius, bringing real generational wealth into this family. Marcus is just doing what a good brother does by backing him up financially. It is how real business works." She rolled her eyes, letting out a loud, exaggerated sigh that echoed in the quiet suite. "So please, Maya, do not come in here and ruin our celebration. Do not use that angry black woman attitude in this hotel. We are doing big things today, and your jealousy is ruining the vibe." I looked at my sister-in-law. She was willingly weaponizing racial stereotypes against her own kind, just to defend the arrogance of her white husband. She was calling me an angry black woman while standing in a luxury suite paid for by my husband's theft of my property. She thought she was putting me in my place, defending the new king of the family. She had no idea she had just handed me the match to burn their entire kingdom to the ground. I absorbed her words, letting the insult wash over me without changing my expression. Chloe wanted me to react. She wanted me to raise my voice so Liam could smirk and Marcus could play the exhausted husband dealing with an irrational wife. Vivian was already nodding along with Chloe's assessment, clutching her champagne glass like a trophy. They were a united front bound together by their shared delusion of superiority and their willingness to drain my resources to fund it. Liam reached down and picked up the contract, tapping it against the table. "Listen to your sister-in-law, Maya. This document right here is the future. It is the kind of legacy building you could never comprehend with your small-time internet hobbies. Why do not you take the kid down to the hotel restaurant? Put a nice lunch on Marcus's tab and let the adults finish our corporate restructuring." He smiled, showing perfectly white teeth, entirely unaware that the document he was tapping against the mahogany table was completely worthless the moment I decided it was. They thought they had secured their future using my money. They thought they had outsmarted the quiet housewife. But the game had not even started yet. Vivian stood up, smoothing the front of her tailored church dress. She looked at me as if I were a stain on the expensive hotel rug, entirely unfazed by the fact that her son had just been caught committing financial fraud. She lifted her chin, her eyes narrowing with malice. "My son is a senior financial director, Maya. Using his assets to uplift his sister's husband is a family tradition. It is how real men build empires." She took a sip of her champagne, leaning closer to me. "You have been living comfortably under his roof and eating off his paycheck for 8 years. Do not be petty and small-minded just because you do not understand corporate finance." I looked at this woman, a mother who actively encouraged her son to risk his family's home to impress a white man who openly disrespected us. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. The house was mine. The paycheck she flaunted was a fraction of what my company earned in a single afternoon. She preached about family values and integrity every Sunday at our local congregation, yet here she was cheering as her son literally signed our lives away. But revealing my hand right then would have been a waste of my greatest advantage. I did not raise my voice. I did not give them the angry, dramatic performance they were all waiting for. Instead, I calmly reached down and picked up Zuri, settling my daughter onto my hip. Then, with my free hand, I pulled out my phone. I stepped right up to the coffee table, ignoring Liam's sudden glare, and snapped a crystal clear photo of the signature page on that loan agreement. Marcus lunged forward, his previous cowardice replaced by sudden raw panic. He knew exactly what that photograph meant. It was tangible, undeniable proof of forgery. "What are you doing?" "Delete that right now," he shouted. He reached for my phone, but I took a smooth step back, easily slipping out of his reach. I slipped the phone safely into my coat pocket. "I am just keeping a record for the family archives," I said, my voice dangerously soft. I looked directly into my husband's terrified eyes. The smugness he had tried to borrow from Liam had completely evaporated, leaving only the weak, insecure man I should have seen years ago. I offered him a cold, razor-sharp smile. "Enjoy that imported champagne, Marcus. And whatever expensive steak you plan on ordering tonight to celebrate this brilliant business move, just make sure you pay for it in cash." I turned on my heel and walked out of the suite. Chloe shouted something insulting down the hallway, and Liam let out a loud, mocking laugh, but the heavy wooden door clicked shut, cutting their voices off completely. I did not look back. I carried Zuri down the plush hotel hallway, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the lobby button. My heart was not breaking, it was calculating. The ride to Chicago O'Hare International Airport was quiet. The cold winter wind rattled against the windows of the taxi, but inside I felt nothing but absolute focus. Zuri was happily playing a game on her tablet, completely unaware of the financial earthquake I was about to trigger. For 8 years, I had quietly funded Marcus's fragile ego. I had funneled thousands of dollars a month into a joint account, under the guise of an investment return, just so he could feel like the primary breadwinner. I gave him the platinum credit cards. I gave him the illusion of absolute power, because I loved him and wanted him to feel confident in a world that is often harsh to black men. But he had taken my protection and used it to destroy me. I stared out the window at the passing city lights and opened my secure encrypted messaging app. I typed a quick, precise message to my lead wealth manager back in Atlanta. "Initiate liquidation protocol on all secondary assets. Lock all credit accounts, freeze the joint checking, and cancel every secondary card issued under Marcus's name immediately. Cut the safety net. Leave him with exactly zero." The reply came back in less than 60 seconds. "Protocol initiated. All accounts frozen." I leaned my head against the leather seat of the taxi, a genuine smile finally touching my lips as I imagined exactly how the rest of their evening was going to play out. Right about now, the initial thrill of my departure would be wearing off. Marcus would be calling down to the concierge or waving over a waiter at the hotel's 5-star restaurant to settle their lavish bill. He would confidently pull out his sleek platinum card, the one he loved to flash in front of Liam to prove his status and wealth. He would drop it on the silver tray with a smug, self-satisfied smile, waiting for the praise of his mother and sister. And then the waiter would return. "I am sorry, sir. This card has been declined." Marcus would laugh nervously, blaming a bank error or a security flag from traveling. He would quickly hand over another card. Declined. A third card. Declined. The $5,000 bill for their luxury penthouse suite, the top-shelf liquor, and the expensive room service would sit there on the table demanding immediate payment. I could perfectly picture the shift in the room. Liam, the supposed tech genius and venture capitalist, would suddenly look away entirely, refusing to open his own wallet to help the brother-in-law he viewed as beneath him. Chloe would look completely embarrassed, frantically checking her own empty bank accounts. Vivian's proud, boastful demeanor would shatter into absolute panic as management was called over to the table. And Marcus would be forced to frantically call customer service, stepping away into a quiet corner, only to hear a robotic automated voice telling him his accounts were completely frozen, pending a security investigation. He would have no way to pay for the room they were sitting in, no way to pay for the flights back to Atlanta, and no way to impress the white man he had just risked his entire family's future for. They thought they could use me as a stepping stone. They thought they could disrespect me to my face, steal my property in the shadows, and toast to their own cleverness in a penthouse suite. But they were about to learn a very hard lesson. You cannot bite the hand that feeds you and still expect a guaranteed seat at the dining table. Leaving them stranded with a massive bill in a city miles away from home was not the grand finale. It was barely the beginning. It was just the perfect appetizer for the main course of absolute inescapable ruin I was preparing to serve them the moment they dragged themselves back to Atlanta. The flight back to Atlanta was the most peaceful 2 hours I had experienced in years. I watched the city lights of Buckhead emerge through the airplane window, feeling a profound sense of clarity. By the time my private driver pulled up to my gated driveway, I had completely compartmentalized the betrayal. I tucked Zuri into her bed, kissed her forehead, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I knew exactly what was coming next. Marcus was predictable. A man operating entirely on bruised ego and panic will always try to assert dominance the only way he knows how. I did not have to wait long. Marcus caught the very next flight out of Chicago. It was barely 3 in the morning when the heavy oak front door slammed open, echoing through the quiet foyer. I sat in the leather armchair by the unlit fireplace, waiting in the dark. He stormed into the living room, throwing his overnight bag onto the pristine hardwood floor. His tie was undone, his designer suit wrinkled, and his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Do you have any idea what you just did to me?" They humiliated me. The hotel manager threatened to call the police because every single card declined. I had to beg Liam to cover the bill, and he looked at me like I was a beggar on the street. "You embarrassed me in front of my family." I took a slow sip of my water, not bothering to turn on a lamp. I simply watched him unravel. "You embarrassed yourself, Marcus. I did not force you to forge my signature on a commercial loan." He paced across the room, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. "You think you are so smart because you threw a tantrum and locked the accounts. Well, consider your little allowance permanently revoked. I am cutting off your access to the joint checking. I am canceling the grocery cards. If you want to eat, if you want to put gas in your car, you are going to have to come begging to me. You are going to learn what it actually means to respect the man who provides for you." I almost laughed out loud. He was trying to financially abuse the woman who was secretly funding his entire existence. He honestly believed his corporate salary was keeping our lifestyle afloat, completely ignoring the fact that his paychecks barely covered his luxury car lease and his expensive golf club memberships. I had been quietly subsidizing our life for nearly a decade, and he was threatening to cut me off from my own money. I let him have his moment of false superiority. I simply set my glass down, stood up, and walked past him toward the stairs. "We will see how that works out for you," I said softly, leaving him fuming in the dark. I woke up the next morning feeling remarkably refreshed. I had just finished making Zuri a plate of blueberry pancakes when the sound of heavy tires crunching on the gravel driveway caught my attention. I looked out the kitchen window and saw a large moving truck parked directly behind Marcus's car. Behind the truck, a sleek black SUV pulled up. The doors opened and out stepped the unholy trinity of my in-laws, Vivian, Chloe, and Liam. They marched up the front steps like an invading army. Before I even reached the foyer, Marcus had opened the door to let them in. Vivian strode inside first, carrying a designer handbag and pointing a manicured finger at the moving men trailing behind her. "Be careful with those vintage leather trunks," she ordered loudly, completely ignoring my presence in my own home. "Bring them straight up to the master suite on the second floor." I stepped into the hallway, crossing my arms over my chest. "Nobody is bringing anything up my stairs," I stated clearly. "What is going on here?" Vivian turned to me, her face locked into a condescending sneer. "Marcus did not tell you." "Of course he did not. You probably threw another one of your little fits. Since Liam is bringing a multi-million-dollar tech company into our family, Marcus made the executive decision to have Chloe and Liam move in here to save capital for the startup. Men doing big things need the proper space and resources to thrive. Sister-in-laws like you can easily clear out and move to the guest rooms. Marcus stepped up beside his mother, avoiding my direct gaze, but puffing out his chest to look authoritative. It makes financial sense, Maya. We have 6 bedrooms. They are taking the master suite because it has the attached private study. You and I are moving to the smaller rooms down the hall. As my wife, I expect you to be accommodating and hospitable to my family while we get this business off the ground. Chloe pushed past me, dragging a heavy designer suitcase across my imported marble floors. She smirked at me over her shoulder. Do not worry, Maya. You can still use the kitchen. We will need you to handle the cooking while Liam focuses on his venture capital meetings. Just try to keep the toddler quiet during business hours, okay? Then Liam walked through the front doors. He did not say hello. He did not wipe his feet. He just stood in the center of my meticulously designed foyer and looked around with an expression of profound disgust. He reached out and tapped a priceless abstract sculpture I had commissioned from a prominent African-American artist, shaking his head. This decor is incredibly loud, Liam said, his voice dripping with unmistakable racial microaggressions. It is a bit too ethnic for a professional environment. If I am going to be hosting potential investors here, we need to neutralize this space. Marcus, have the movers take all this junk down to the basement. And Maya, that little home office of yours with the terrible lighting, clear it out by tomorrow. I am tearing out those built-in shelves to put in a golf simulator and a wet bar. I need a proper recreation room to decompress after dealing with actual business all day. He stood in the center of the home I paid for, insulting my culture, my taste, and my career, demanding I tear down my workspace so he could play virtual golf. He looked at me expecting submission. He expected the quiet, obedient housewife Marcus had promised them. He had absolutely no idea that the moving truck parked in my driveway was not going to be unloaded. It was going to be the exact vehicle they would use to pack up their shattered dignity when I finally showed them the door. I did not move from the center of the foyer. Instead, I turned my attention directly to the lead mover. He was a burly man holding a clipboard, looking incredibly uncomfortable with the toxic family dynamic playing out in front of him. Leave the boxes on the porch, I told him calmly. They will not be staying long enough to unpack anything. Marcus stepped forward, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. He hated being challenged, especially in front of other men, and doubly so in front of his white brother-in-law. He marched right up to me, trying to use his height to intimidate me into submission. Are you deaf, Maya? He growled, his voice vibrating with anger. I told the movers to take the boxes to the master suite. You do not give orders in a house that I pay the mortgage for. Now get out of the way and go pack up that pathetic office of yours like Liam asked. I looked at the man I had married. He really believed his own lies. He had repeated the false narrative of being the sole financial provider so many times that he had effectively brainwashed himself into forgetting the reality of our situation. Vivian chimed in from the doorway, her designer purse clutched tightly in her hands. A good wife submits to her husband's financial decisions, Maya. You have contributed nothing to this estate. Marcus works himself to the bone to keep a roof over your head, and you repay him by throwing a tantrum in Chicago and locking his credit cards. You are incredibly lucky he is not throwing you out on the street today. I turned and walked slowly down the long hallway toward my home office. Marcus thought I was retreating. He let out a loud, scoffing laugh, gesturing for Liam and Chloe to follow him. See? Marcus boasted loudly, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. You just have to remind her who is actually in charge around here. I will have this room cleared out for you by tonight, Liam. We can get the contractors in tomorrow to measure for the golf simulator. But I did not walk into the office to pack my things. I stopped right at the threshold, turned around, and leaned back against the heavy mahogany door, crossing my arms over my chest. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, almost crashing right into me. Move, he ordered. He raised his hand, stepping dangerously close, looking as if he was going to physically shove me aside to prove a point to the audience behind him. I did not flinch. If you touch me, Marcus, the police will be the ones escorting you out instead of private security, I warned. My voice dropped to a deadly, icy calm that made him freeze in place. I stepped sideways, not to let him into my sanctuary, but to walk over to the sleek console table in the hallway. I poured myself a cup of herbal tea from the silver carafe I had prepared earlier that morning. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch, letting them marinate in the uncomfortable tension. "You love talking about your mortgage, Marcus," I said carefully, setting the teacup down on its matching saucer. "You love reminding everyone that your name is on the deed, that you make the monthly payments out of your prestigious corporate salary. But tell me, do you actually know who you are writing those monthly checks to?" Marcus scoffed, looking back at Liam and Chloe as if I had just asked the most idiotic question in the world. "I write them to the bank, obviously, like any normal property owner. Have you completely lost your mind?" "That is a fascinating assumption," I replied. I reached into the hidden drawer of the console table and pulled out a thick manila folder sealed with a bright red legal stamp. I tossed it onto the glass surface of the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud that made Chloe jump. Because if you actually read your financial statements, instead of just signing whatever your assistant puts in front of you, you would know that your original bank sold your mortgage exactly 3 years ago. Vivian frowned, stepping closer to her son. "Banks sell mortgages all the time. That does not change the fact that my son is the man of this house and he owns this property. It changes everything when you realize who bought the debt," I said smoothly. I opened the folder, flipping directly to the final page of the deed transfer and loan acquisition documents. "3 years ago, you made some terrible investments, Marcus. Your credit score tanked, you missed 2 consecutive mortgage payments, and the bank was preparing to issue a formal notice of default. To save your fragile pride and keep a roof over Zuri's head, I stepped in behind the scenes." I pointed a manicured finger to the bold black ink at the top of the official document. "Your bad debt was purchased in its entirety by a private wealth management entity called the Vanguard Trust Fund. You have been paying your mortgage directly to them for 36 months. Marcus stared at the paper, his brow furrowing as he tried to comprehend what I was saying. Liam leaned over his shoulder, his pale eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "So what?" Liam sneered, trying to maintain his arrogant posture. "He pays a trust fund instead of a commercial bank. He still holds the legal right to occupy the property as the borrower. You are just wasting our time trying to sound smart. Move out of the way so we can get to work. Read the authorized signature at the bottom of the page, Liam," I instructed. My voice rang clear and absolute in the quiet hallway. Liam's eyes flicked to the bottom of the document. The color drained from his face so fast, he looked practically translucent. He took a sharp step back, bumping into Chloe, staring at me, as if I had just grown a second head. "What does it say?" Marcus demanded, his voice thick with sudden panic. He snatched the paper from the table, his eyes frantically searching the bottom of the page. And then he froze. Complete, absolute paralysis took over his entire body. The paper began to shake in his trembling hands. "It says my name," I stated, delivering the final crushing blow. "I am the sole beneficiary and the controlling director of the Vanguard Trust Fund. I bought your debt in pure cash. I am the bank, Marcus. You have been paying rent to your own wife for 3 years. When I saw Marcus's hands tremble, I felt a deep, profound sense of vindication. For years I had shrunk myself to make him feel big. I had hidden my wealth, my business acumen, and my true success, just so he could sit at the head of the dinner table and play the role of the successful patriarch. Vivian had constantly praised him for providing a beautiful home for his family, and I had quietly smiled and agreed, knowing full well that my crisis management firm had generated the capital to buy the very ground we stood on. Chloe grabbed Marcus's arm, peering over his shoulder to look at the signature. "This has to be illegal," she stammered, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "You cannot just buy your husband's debt secretly. That is fraud." "It is perfectly legal," I corrected her, enjoying the absolute desperation radiating from her face. "Corporate entities purchase distressed debt every single day in this country. The fact that Marcus never bothered to look up the board of directors for the trust fund he was sending thousands of dollars to each month is a testament to his own financial incompetence, not mine." Vivian's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. The pristine image of her highly successful, providing son had just been shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. "You manipulated him!" Vivian gasped, clutching her chest. "You tricked my son into paying you. You are a wicked, deceitful woman." I paid off a debt he could not afford to keep him out of bankruptcy court. I fired back, my eyes locking onto my mother-in-law. I saved him from financial ruin. But yesterday in Chicago, he decided to take the very house I saved and secretly mortgage it to fund a man who thinks I am beneath him. Marcus violated the core terms of his loan agreement with the Vanguard Trust Fund the second he attempted to secure secondary financing without the primary lender's consent. Marcus dropped the paper. It fluttered to the hardwood floor, landing right at his feet. "Maya, please," he whispered. His voice was entirely devoid of the aggressive bravado he had walked in with. He was looking at me not as his obedient wife, but as the executioner of his future. I did not offer him a single ounce of pity. The time for grace had expired the moment he let Liam disrespect me in that hotel suite. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a second document, a crisp, freshly printed legal notice. I handed it directly to Marcus. He took it mechanically, his eyes wide with fear. "Because you violated the terms of your mortgage by attempting to pledge this property as collateral to an unauthorized third party, the Vanguard Trust Fund is calling the loan due in full." Immediately I explained, enunciating every single word, so the reality would sink deep into his bones. "This is your official notice of foreclosure and eviction. You do not own this house, Marcus. I do. And you, your mother, your sister, and your arrogant brother-in-law have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and vacate my property." The next 24 hours were a masterclass in desperate delusion. Instead of packing their belongings and vacating my property, Marcus and his mother decided to play a very dangerous game of chicken. Faced with the reality of losing the house and their lavish lifestyle, Vivian convinced Marcus to take out a high-interest predatory loan from a shadow lender. They used that fast cash to rent out the grand ballroom at the most exclusive country club in Atlanta. Their plan was simple and entirely foolish. They believed that if they threw a massive, opulent launch gala for Liam, he would secure actual venture capital from the city's wealthy elite. With that new money, they planned to hire a team of aggressive lawyers to fight my foreclosure and keep their twisted family dynamic afloat. The night of the gala, the country club was glowing with crystal lights as valet drivers parked rows of luxury vehicles. I arrived wearing a midnight blue haute couture gown that cost more than Marcus's new predatory loan. I walked up the sweeping stone staircase toward the grand entrance, my heels clicking sharply against the marble. Marcus had anticipated I might show up to ruin his big night. He and Vivian were standing right by the main doors, flanked by two burly private security guards they had specifically hired to keep me out. When Vivian saw me approaching, her face twisted into a victorious, ugly sneer. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here," Maya Vivian announced loudly, ensuring the arriving guests could hear her. "You are not on the guest list. This is an event for high-level executives and true innovators. You will never reach Liam's level of success. Go back home and bake some cookies because you are certainly not getting through these doors." Marcus stepped forward, nodding to the security guards. "Do not let this woman inside. She is a disgruntled ex who is trying to cause a scene. Escort her off the premises immediately." I looked at the two guards, then at my husband and his mother. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice or demand entry. I simply offered Vivian a bright, knowing smile, turned on my heel, and walked right back down the stone steps. I could hear Vivian's loud, triumphant laughter echoing behind me. She truly believed she had won. She thought she had successfully locked me out of the building. She was incredibly mistaken. I walked around the side of the grand clubhouse, bypassing the main lobby entirely. I approached a discreet, unmarked wood-paneled door. A digital keypad sat next to the brass handle. I punched in a 6-digit code. The door slid open, revealing a private gold-trimmed elevator reserved strictly for the country club's owners and their highest-tier guests. 10 minutes after Vivian laughed in my face, the elevator doors chimed and opened directly onto the second-floor mezzanine overlooking the grand ballroom. Below me, the room was packed with Atlanta's wealthy investors. Liam was standing on the main stage wearing a tailored tuxedo and holding a microphone. He was pacing back and forth, delivering an overly confident, buzzword-filled speech about his revolutionary new software and how his tech startup was going to change the world. Chloe was sitting in the front row looking at him with absolute adoration. Marcus and Vivian were standing near the bar, practically glowing with borrowed pride. I walked down the curved grand staircase, my midnight blue gown catching the spotlight. The crowd's attention naturally drifted toward me. Liam paused his speech, his pale eyes locking onto my figure. Absolute panic washed over his face. He quickly pointed a shaking finger at me and yelled into the microphone, "Security, get that crazy woman out of here right now. I told you to keep her out." The two guards from the front door rushed into the ballroom, marching straight toward me. But before they could even get within 5 feet of my dress, a sharp, authoritative voice echoed across the room. "Stand down immediately." The general manager of the country club, a stern older man who ran the establishment with an iron fist, rushed forward. He forcefully shoved the security guards aside. Then, to the absolute shock of Marcus, Vivian, and Liam, the general manager, bowed respectfully to me. "Ms. Washington," he said clearly, his voice carrying through the silent ballroom. "It is an absolute honor to have you here tonight. Please let me know if you need anything at all." What my ignorant in-laws did not know was that a year ago this prestigious country club had been on the verge of bankruptcy due to a massive, highly publicized racial discrimination scandal. My crisis management firm had stepped in, restructured, their board handled the press, and saved the entire establishment from total ruin. I was not just a guest, I was their ultimate savior. I gave the manager a polite nod and continued my walk straight up onto the main stage. Liam backed away from me as if I were holding a weapon. I calmly reached out and took the microphone right out of his trembling hand. I turned to face the hundreds of wealthy investors staring up at me. "Thank you for that inspiring speech about self-reliance, Liam," I said, my voice echoing through the massive ballroom. "But I think you forgot to mention a tiny, insignificant detail to your potential investors here tonight. You forgot to tell them that your revolutionary software is actually built on source code stolen directly from the Apex Corporation, and your sole distribution partner is a subsidiary entirely owned by Apex." The crowd erupted into loud, confused murmurs. Marcus, completely losing his mind, abandoned his drink at the bar and sprinted up the stage stairs. He charged toward me, his face red with fury. "Shut your mouth!" Maya Marcus screamed, completely forgetting his professional demeanor. "You are insane. You have no right to stand up here and speak on behalf of the Apex Corporation. You are just a housewife trying to ruin my family." I looked at my husband, the man who had underestimated me every single day for the past 8 years. I raised my free hand and snapped my fingers. Immediately, the giant projection screen behind us went completely black. Then a massive, high-resolution image filled the screen. It was the official corporate registry and board of directors page for the Apex Holding Network. Right in the center, displayed in bold, undeniable letters, was my face and my name. "I am Maya Washington," I announced, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "I am the Chief Executive Officer and the sole founder of the Apex Holding Network. And starting right this second, my company is terminating every single vendor contract associated with Horizon Tech. Furthermore, my legal team has just filed a federal lawsuit against you, Liam, for intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. You do not have a startup. You have a $2 million debt and a massive legal battle." Liam physically collapsed. His knees gave out and he sank onto the stage floor, gripping his hair in absolute terror. The arrogant white man who had mocked my culture and my home was now a broken, hyperventilating mess at my feet. The investors in the room did not wait for an explanation. The moment the word lawsuit left my mouth, they began grabbing their coats and walking out the doors in droves. The grand gala was over before the appetizers were even served. Marcus stood frozen, staring at the giant screen displaying my CEO title. His brain simply could not process the magnitude of his own stupidity. Chloe was sobbing loudly in the front row, but Vivian was not done. She possessed a special kind of toxic resilience. Seeing her entire world crumbling, she chose the most vicious, desperate path available. Vivian charged onto the stage, marching right up to Marcus and delivering a stinging, open-handed slap across his face. "Wake up, you fool!" Vivian shrieked at her son, then turned her hateful glare onto me. "So what if you are rich? You are still a monster. Marcus, do it now. Release the proof that she is mentally unstable and having an affair with a white shareholder. I already filed the paperwork at the courthouse this morning. We are getting full custody of Zuri. You will never see your daughter again." The threat hung in the air, a desperate, filthy tactic to use my own child as a weapon to force me into submission. They thought hitting me where it hurt the most would make me surrender my wealth to keep my daughter. They were about to find out that cornering a mother is the fastest way to guarantee your own absolute destruction. The moment I handed Marcus that eviction notice, the countdown began. I fully expected them to pack their designer bags and slink out the front door under the cover of darkness. But I had severely underestimated the sheer depth of their delusion. When dealing with toxic narcissists, logic is always the first casualty. Instead of accepting defeat, Marcus and his mother decided to double down on their own destruction. Over the next 24 hours, they did not pack a single box. I stayed out of their way, monitoring my home security cameras from a luxury hotel downtown, watching them scramble like rats on a sinking ship. Through my financial operatives, I kept a close eye on Marcus's frantic movements. Because I had frozen his credit and initiated the foreclosure, traditional banks laughed him out of their lobbies. He had zero liquid capital. But Vivian, desperate to maintain her illusion of high society dominance, dug into her network. She connected Marcus with a predatory, high-interest shadow lender. It was a move of pure, unadulterated financial suicide. Marcus signed a legally binding agreement with a loan shark, borrowing a massive sum of money at an astronomical interest rate. They were betting their literal lives on Liam. The plan, formulated in the echo chamber of their own arrogance, was to use that borrowed cash to throw a spectacular, opulent launch gala for Liam's startup. They believed that if they rented out the most exclusive venue in Atlanta and invited the city's wealthiest angel investors, Liam would effortlessly secure millions in venture capital. With that new money, Marcus planned to hire a ruthless legal team to tie me up in court for years, dispute my ownership of the house, and forcefully take back control of his life. They chose the prestigious Oakwood Country Club for their grand stand. It was a notoriously exclusive establishment in Buckhead, a place where Atlanta's old money and new elite mingled over expensive bourbon and closed-door deals. Renting the grand ballroom on such short notice cost them nearly every penny of that predatory loan. They were completely all in. I sat in my hotel suite sipping black coffee as my assistant relayed the details of their gala. They actually thought they were outsmarting me. They truly believed they could simply outspend me with borrowed money and use their social connections to crush me into submission. It was almost poetic how perfectly they were setting their own trap. I spent the afternoon preparing for the event. This was not just a party. It was an execution. I hired a professional styling team to come to my suite. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, elegant style that left my face completely exposed and unapologetic. I chose a stunning floor-length midnight blue gown with sharp architectural lines that commanded absolute authority. I paired it with diamond stud earrings and a pair of pointed stilettos that sounded like a gavel, striking wood with every step. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the quiet, accommodating wife Marcus had grown accustomed to. I saw the CEO who was about to dismantle his entire existence. When my private car pulled up the sweeping, lantern-lit driveway of the Oakwood Country Club, the evening was already in full swing. Valet attendants were rushing to park a steady stream of luxury vehicles. The crisp evening air hummed with the sound of a live string quartet drifting from the main lobby. I stepped out of the car, adjusting the fit of my gown. The grand entrance of the clubhouse was flanked by towering white columns. Standing right at the top of the wide stone steps, acting like the royal hosts of the evening, were Marcus and Vivian. Marcus was wearing a rented tuxedo that looked just a little too tight around the shoulders. Vivian was draped in a heavily beaded dress, holding a glass of champagne and greeting arriving investors with a sickly sweet practiced smile. But what caught my eye were the two massive, imposing private security guards positioned directly on either side of the heavy oak doors. They were holding a printed guest list, checking names with strict scrutiny. Marcus had specifically hired them to ensure I could not crash his defining moment. I walked slowly up the stone steps. The rhythmic clicking of my heels caught Marcus's attention. He turned his head and the polite host smile vanished from his face instantly. He tapped his mother's arm, pointing in my direction. Vivian's eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. She stepped forward, effectively blocking my path to the entrance. The two security guards immediately stepped up right behind her, crossing their thick arms, forming a human barricade. Several arriving guests, wealthy men and women in evening wear, paused on the steps to watch the confrontation unfold. This was exactly what Vivian wanted. She wanted a public audience to witness my humiliation. "You really have no shame, Maya," Vivian announced. Her voice was loud, intentionally projecting so the surrounding investors could hear every single word. "You actually thought you could show up here and ruin my family's big night? You are not on the guest list. This is a private, high-level corporate event for true innovators and visionaries." Marcus stepped up beside his mother, puffing out his chest to look as intimidating as possible. "Go home, Maya. You have already done enough damage. Liam is about to secure millions of dollars in funding tonight, and when he does, I am hiring the best lawyers in the state to destroy you. You are not getting past these doors." I stopped on the step just below them, looking up at their smug, victorious faces. I kept my expression completely relaxed. Vivian took a step closer, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "You will never reach Liam's level," she spat, her tone dripping with condescension. "You are nothing but a bitter, jealous woman who cannot handle seeing her husband's family succeed. Go back to your little housewife hobbies. Go back to making grocery lists and leaving the real business to the men. You are not welcome in this tier of society." The security guards tensed, clearly expecting me to start screaming or trying to push my way past them. The whispering from the watching guests grew louder. They expected the angry black woman stereotype that Vivian was so desperately trying to provoke, but I did not give them a single drop of that satisfaction. I looked at Marcus, taking in his nervous sweating and his rented tuxedo. I looked at Vivian, clutching her champagne glass like a lifeline. I smiled. It was a bright, genuine, entirely unbothered smile that seemed to deeply unsettle my mother-in-law. "You are absolutely right, Vivian," I said smoothly, my voice calm and perfectly modulated. "I am not on your guest list. Enjoy your evening. I hope the champagne is to your liking." Without another word, I turned gracefully on my heel and walked right back down the stone steps. I could hear Vivian's loud, triumphant laughter echoing behind me. She was actively boasting to the guests about how she had just put me in my place, bragging about how she had successfully protected Liam's multi-million-dollar launch from a jealous ex. Marcus was probably letting out a massive sigh of relief, truly believing he had won the battle. They thought my retreat was a surrender. They were profoundly mistaken. I did not walk back to my waiting car. Instead, I walked around the side of the sprawling clubhouse, following a manicured hedge path that led away from the public eye. I bypassed the valet station and the crowded main lobby entirely. I approached a discreet, unmarked wood-paneled door tucked away in a private alcove of the building. Next to the brass handle sat a sleek digital keypad. I reached out and punched in a highly classified 6-digit code. The heavy door clicked and slid open silently. What my ignorant in-laws did not know, and what they could never have possibly researched, was that a year ago, this very country club had been on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy due to a massive, highly publicized racial discrimination scandal that had terrified their investors. My crisis management firm had been quietly retained by their board of directors. I had personally restructured their entire public relations department, handled the aggressive media fallout, and saved the establishment from total ruin. As a result, I was not just a standard club member. I held supreme executive privileges. I stepped into the hidden corridor, The space revealed a private gold-trimmed elevator reserved strictly for the country club's owners, their board members, and their highest-tier VIPs. I pressed the single button. The doors glided shut, sealing me inside the luxurious cab. Soft ambient music played as the elevator began its smooth ascent. I checked my reflection in the polished mirrored panels, making sure not a single hair was out of place. I adjusted the neckline of my midnight blue gown and took a deep, steadying breath. 10 minutes after Vivian had publicly humiliated me on the front steps, laughing about how I would never be allowed inside her precious event, the gold elevator chimed. The doors slid open. I stepped out onto the second-floor mezzanine, an exclusive wrap-around balcony that looked directly down over the grand ballroom. The stage was set, the audience was gathered, and I was ready to bring the entire house down. I flew across the country to surprise my husband in his Chicago hotel room, expecting to find him exhausted from back-to-back finance meetings. Instead, when the suite door swung open, I completely froze. He was not alone, and he was not working. The people lounging inside his room and the legal documents sitting on the coffee table revealed a financial betrayal so deep it threatened to leave my daughter and me homeless. Before I tell you exactly how I smiled, walked away, and legally dismantled their entire lives by dinner time, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind a toxic family who really holds the power. From my vantage point on the second-floor mezzanine, I looked down at the glittering spectacle Marcus and Vivian had bankrolled with predatory debt. The grand ballroom of the Oakwood Country Club was packed with Atlanta's wealthy elite. Waiters in crisp white jackets floated through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. At the very front of the room, standing on a brightly lit stage, was Liam. He was wearing a tailored tuxedo, pacing back and forth with a microphone in his hand. He was delivering an overly confident buzzword-filled pitch about his revolutionary new software. He spoke about innovation, disruption, and generational wealth. The investors in the room were nodding along, captivated by the illusion of his Silicon Valley genius. In the front row, Chloe sat looking at her husband with absolute, unquestioning adoration. Near the private bar, Marcus and Vivian stood shoulder to shoulder, practically vibrating with borrowed pride. They truly believed they had done it. They thought they had secured their financial salvation. I placed my hand on the polished mahogany railing of the grand sweeping staircase and began my descent. My midnight blue haute couture gown caught the ambient light of the massive crystal chandeliers above. With every step I took, the sharp, deliberate click of my stilettos echoed against the marble steps. I did not rush. I moved with the slow, calculated grace of a predator who already knows the trap has been sprung. As I reached the lower landing, heads began to turn. The ambient chatter in the ballroom slowly died down. Even the live string quartet seemed to falter for a fraction of a second as the collective attention of the room shifted entirely to me. Liam was mid-sentence boasting about his proprietary algorithms when his pale eyes locked onto my figure. The arrogant, visionary smile melted off his face instantly. He stopped speaking. A suffocating silence fell over the massive ballroom. Liam gripped the microphone, his knuckles turning white and sheer panic overtook his features. He did not see a quiet housewife. He saw the woman who had effortlessly frozen his brother-in-law's bank accounts from a moving taxi. His fear rapidly morphed into ugly, desperate rage. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "Security!" Liam barked into the microphone, his voice echoing loudly through the speakers. "Get that crazy black woman out of here right now. I gave strict orders to keep her off the premises." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of wealthy investors. His blatant, racially charged disrespect hung in the air, instantly souring the elegant atmosphere. Marcus and Vivian froze by the bar, their eyes wide with terror as they realized I had somehow bypassed their barricade. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The two burly private security guards Marcus had hired rushed into the room, marching aggressively toward me. They reached out, fully intending to grab my arms and physically drag me out of the gala. But before they could even brush the fabric of my silk gown, a sharp, incredibly authoritative voice commanded the room. "Stand down immediately. Do not touch her." Charles, the general manager of the Oakwood Country Club, A stern, powerful older man who ran the prestigious establishment with an iron fist rushed through the crowd. He marched straight up to the private security guards and forcefully shoved their hands away from me. "You are out of line," Charles snapped at the guards. Then, to the absolute shock of Marcus, Vivian, and Liam, the general manager turned to me and bowed deeply, a gesture of profound, undeniable respect. "Ms. Washington," Charles said, clearly ensuring his voice carried to the stunned onlookers, "I deeply apologize for this horrific disrespect. It is an absolute honor to have you back at our establishment tonight. Please tell me if you need these men removed from your presence." Marcus dropped his cocktail glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor, but no one even looked his way. Vivian clutched her chest, her mouth hanging open as she tried to comprehend why the most powerful man in the building was bowing to her despised daughter-in-law. What my ignorant in-laws did not know, and what they could never have possibly researched, was the true history of this venue. Exactly 1 year ago, the Oakwood Country Club had been facing total financial ruin due to a massive, highly publicized racial discrimination scandal involving their former board of directors. Investors were pulling out. The press was tearing them apart. My crisis management firm had been quietly retained to handle the fallout. I personally gutted their toxic leadership, restructured their public relations department, and saved their multi-million-dollar legacy from absolute destruction. To the management of this club, I was not just a guest, I was their ultimate savior. I held supreme, untouchable executive privileges within these walls. I offered Charles a polite, gracious nod. "Thank you, Charles," I said smoothly, "but I can handle this from here." I stepped past the frozen security guards and walked straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. The crowd of investors parted for me like the Red Sea. I climbed the short steps up to the main stage. Liam instinctively backed away from me as if I were holding a loaded weapon. He was sweating profusely, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. I walked right up to him. I did not yell, I did not scowl. I simply reached out and took the microphone directly from his trembling, sweaty hand. He was too paralyzed by shock to even resist. I turned my back on him and faced the hundreds of wealthy investors staring up at me. "Thank you for that incredibly inspiring speech about self-reliance and innovation, Liam," I said, my voice rich, calm, and perfectly amplified across the silent room. "You paint a very compelling picture of the future. But I think you forgot to mention a tiny, insignificant detail to your potential investors here tonight." I paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the anticipation wrap around the room like a tightening wire. I looked directly at Marcus and Vivian, who were watching me with expressions of pure, unadulterated horror. I brought the microphone closer to my lips. "You forgot to tell them that your revolutionary software does not actually exist. The groundbreaking technology you just spent the last 20 minutes pitching is built entirely on source code stolen directly from the Apex Corporation." The ballroom erupted. Investors gasped, exchanging shocked, rapid whispers. Some immediately pulled out their phones. The sophisticated, polite atmosphere shattered instantly into chaotic confusion. Stealing source code was not just a corporate faux pas. It was a massive federal crime that would instantly burn any venture capitalist foolish enough to invest in it. Liam's face drained of all color. He looked like he was going to be violently ill right there on the stage. Chloe let out a loud, high-pitched sob from the front row, covering her face with her hands. But I was not finished. The curtain had just been raised, and I was about to introduce the main act. Marcus finally snapped out of his paralyzed stupor. The sheer panic tightening his chest quickly boiled over into wild, aggressive rage. He abandoned his mother at the private bar and sprinted up the carpeted stairs of the stage. He lunged toward me with his hand outstretched, desperately trying to snatch the microphone away from my grip. "Shut your mouth right now," Marcus roared, his face contorted with fury. "You are completely delusional. What gives you the right to stand up here and claim to speak for a billion-dollar corporation like Apex? You are just a housewife making a fool of yourself and ruining my family." I did not flinch. I simply took a graceful step back, letting his hand grasp empty air. I looked at the man I had married, a man so blinded by his own arrogance and deep-seated insecurities that he could not even recognize the empire his own wife had built right under his nose. He wanted to put me in my place in front of his precious investors. He wanted to silence me to protect a white man who openly despised him. I raised my free hand and snapped my fingers toward the audio-visual booth at the back of the room. The technicians inside were direct employees of the country club, and therefore they answered strictly to me. They immediately cut the feed to Liam's presentation. The giant projection screen behind us went completely black for a fraction of a second. Then a massive high-resolution document illuminated the entire stage, casting a bright white glow over Marcus's furious face. It was the official corporate registry and board of directors page for the Apex Holding Network. Right in the center of the screen, displayed in bold, undeniable letters alongside my professional portrait, was my full legal name. "I am Maya Washington," I announced. My voice cut through the rising chaos of the ballroom, rich and absolutely unshakable. "I am the Chief Executive Officer and the sole founder of the Apex Holding Network. And starting right this second, my company is terminating every single vendor contract associated with Horizon Tech." The silence in the room was so profound you could hear a pin drop. Marcus slowly turned his head to look at the massive screen behind him. His eyes widened as he read my title over and over again, his brain completely unable to process the magnitude of his own stupidity. I turned my attention back to my brother-in-law, who was trembling violently. Furthermore, I continued, "My legal team has just filed a federal lawsuit against you, Liam, for intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. You do not have a brilliant startup. You have a massive legal battle and a mountain of fraudulent debt." The reaction was instantaneous. Liam physically collapsed. His knees simply gave out and he sank onto the stage floor, gripping his hair in absolute terror. The arrogant man who had casually mocked my culture, insulted my home, and called me an angry black woman was now a broken, hyperventilating mess at my feet. All of his unearned confidence vanished the moment his lies were exposed to the light. Down in the front row, Chloe let out a loud, high-pitched wail. She dropped to her knees, reaching out for her husband, her face streaked with ruined makeup. The wealthy investors in the room did not wait for an explanation. In the world of high finance, nothing is more toxic than a federal lawsuit over stolen source code. They dropped their champagne glasses on the nearest tables. They turned their backs on the stage and headed straight for the exit in a mass exodus. They bumped into one another in their rush to the valet station, desperate to distance themselves from Liam's fraudulent company. The grand gala was completely over before the appetizers were even served. Marcus stood frozen on the stage. The reality of his situation was finally crashing down on him. He had secretly mortgaged his house, ruined his marriage, and committed financial fraud for a man who was nothing but a criminal. He looked down at his hands, completely, utterly defeated. But his mother was not finished. Vivian possessed a special kind of toxic resilience. Seeing her entire world crumbling, seeing the wealthy elite fleeing from her party, she chose the most vicious, desperate path available to a cornered narcissist. Vivian charged up the stairs and onto the stage. She marched right up to Marcus and delivered a stinging, open-handed slap directly across his face. The sound echoed loudly across the emptying room. "Wake up, you fool!" Vivian shrieked at her son. She then turned her hateful glare onto me. She was practically foaming at the mouth, her designer dress rustling as she trembled with absolute hatred. She knew she could not fight me on a financial battlefield, so she decided to drag the war down into the mud. "So what if you are rich?" Vivian screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "You are still a monster who destroyed this family. Marcus, do it now. Release the proof to the courts that she is mentally unstable and having an affair with a white shareholder." She took a step closer to me, her eyes wide and manic. "I already filed the emergency paperwork at the courthouse this morning," she hissed. "We are getting full custody of Zuri. We are going to prove you are an unfit mother and you will never see your daughter again." The threat hung in the air, toxic and heavy. It was a desperate, filthy tactic to use my own child as a weapon to force me into submission. They thought that hitting me where it hurt the most would make me surrender my wealth to keep my daughter. They thought the fear of losing Zuri would break my spirit and force me to hand over everything I had built. They were about to find out that cornering a mother is the fastest way to guarantee your own absolute destruction. I flew across the country to surprise my husband in his Chicago hotel room, expecting to find him exhausted from back-to-back finance meetings. Instead, when the suite door swung open, I completely froze. He was not alone, and he was not working. The people lounging inside his room and the legal documents sitting on the coffee table revealed a financial betrayal so deep it threatened to leave my daughter and me homeless. Before I tell you exactly how I smiled, walked away, and legally dismantled their entire lives, by dinner time, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to remind a toxic family who really holds the power. Vivian's desperate threat echoed through the empty grand ballroom. She stood there, chest heaving, demanding that Marcus use my daughter as a pawn in their pathetic game of survival. They honestly believed that dangling my child over a cliff would force me to hand over my empire. I looked at Vivian, then at my husband, who was slowly nodding as if he had just found his lifeline. I did not give them the screaming match they wanted. I simply turned and walked out of the Oakwood Country Club, leaving them standing in the wreckage of their own making. The very next morning, Vivian deployed her most effective weapon. She did not use lawyers or financial experts. She used the church. Vivian was a prominent figure in one of Atlanta's largest congregations. She had spent decades building a network of gossip and influence behind the guise of prayer circles and Sunday school committees. By noon, the rumors were spreading like wildfire across the city. Vivian told everyone who would listen that the sudden wealth I possessed was not earned, but given to me by an older white shareholder I was secretly sleeping with. She painted me as an unstable, negligent mother who abandoned her family for corporate greed. Marcus played his role perfectly. He leaned into the narrative Vivian crafted. He went on a popular local daytime television show, wearing a modest, off-the-rack suit to look relatable. He sat on that brightly lit set and played the role of the devoted, hard-working Black father who had been financially and emotionally gutted by his cold, capitalist wife. He actually squeezed out a few fake tears for the cameras, claiming I had suffered a mental breakdown and was a danger to our 8-year-old daughter. He begged the public for their prayers, acting as though I had thrown him out on the street for absolutely no reason. I watched his television interview from my corner office at the Apex headquarters, sipping my green tea. My public relations team was frantic. They were begging me to release a statement to go on the offensive and crush his narrative. They wanted to release the hotel footage, the forged mortgage documents, everything. But I told them to stand down. I issued a strict gag order across my entire company. No comments to the press, no social media posts. Absolute, utter silence. When you are dealing with narcissists, the worst thing you can do is interrupt them while they are destroying themselves. Marcus was building a public persona based on easily disprovable lies. Every word he spoke on television was another nail in his own coffin, and I was perfectly content to let him keep swinging the hammer. But Marcus did not stop at television interviews. While I was at the office managing the fallout of terminating Liam's contracts, Marcus utilized a dirty legal loophole. Using Vivian's fabricated affidavits and statements from a handful of paid-off church members, his shady lawyer filed an ex parte emergency custody order. Because the courts err on the side of caution when mental instability and child endangerment are alleged, the judge temporarily suspended my custody rights pending a full hearing. When I arrived at Zuri's private school that afternoon to pick her up, the headmaster looked at me with deep sympathy and handed me a copy of the court order. Marcus had already come and taken her. He had hidden my daughter away at a distant cousin's house outside the city limits, refusing to answer my calls or let me speak to her. That was his fatal mistake. Stealing my money was one thing. Disrespecting me in front of strangers was another. But using my child to leverage my compliance was the moment Marcus signed away his freedom. I drove straight to the sleek glass-paneled high-rise building that housed the most ruthless family law firm in the state of Georgia. My lead attorney, a brilliant and unyielding woman named Sarah, was waiting for me in the main conference room. She did not offer me empty sympathies or generic comfort. She knew exactly who I was and what I was capable of. Sarah slid a thick black leather folder across the polished conference table. I had hired a team of elite private investigators the moment I left the country club the previous night. I told them to dig into every single aspect of Liam's life, his business, his associates, and Marcus's connection to all of it. I wanted to know exactly where the money was flowing. I opened the folder. The first few pages were standard background checks, but as I dug deeper into the financial forensic reports, a dark, profound realization washed over me. My eyes scanned the bank transfer records, the offshore account routing numbers, and the encrypted communication logs between Liam and a network of shell companies. The truth was far worse than a simple fake tech startup. Liam was not just an arrogant con artist, he was a criminal, and my husband was his willing accomplice. I looked up from the documents, meeting my lawyer's intense gaze. The anger I felt was no longer hot and explosive. It was freezing cold and entirely focused. Sarah tapped the folder. They filed for an emergency hearing to finalize the custody arrangement and demand spousal support. We are scheduled to be in front of a judge on Friday morning. Marcus thinks he has you cornered. I slowly closed the black folder, resting my hands flat on the smooth leather cover. Marcus and his mother thought they could use the justice system to bleed me dry. They thought they could manipulate the law to steal my daughter and my empire. I stood up from the conference table, smoothing the front of my blazer. File the motions to accept the hearing, I instructed my attorney. Let Marcus walk into that courtroom feeling like a king. It is time to teach that entitled white man and my puppet of a husband what the law really is. The heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Family Court felt entirely different that Friday morning. They were no longer an intimidating threshold. They were the gates to a slaughterhouse, and I was holding the only key. I wore a sharply tailored crimson pantsuit. No jewelry, no distractions, just pure, unadulterated armor. Sarah walked one step behind me, her heels echoing a steady, rhythmic cadence against the marble floor. She gripped the black leather briefcase containing the forensic financial reports like it held a loaded weapon. We entered the courtroom, and the stifling arrogance of my in-laws hit me before I even reached my seat. Marcus was already sitting at the petitioner's table. He wore a brand-new, custom-fitted charcoal suit, undoubtedly purchased with money Vivian had scraped together from her church friends. He sat up perfectly straight, his chin raised, projecting the image of a deeply wronged noble patriarch. I glanced at the gallery directly behind him. Vivian sat in the front row, clutching a delicate lace handkerchief, perfectly positioned to play the role of the weeping, distressed grandmother for the judge. Right next to her was Chloe, clinging tightly to Liam's arm. Liam looked slightly worse for wear. His posture was rigid, and dark, heavy circles framed his pale eyes. The shadow lenders Marcus and Vivian had borrowed from were clearly breathing down his neck, demanding their money. Yet despite his impending financial ruin, Liam still managed to shoot me a condescending, victorious smirk as I walked down the aisle. He genuinely believed that Marcus winning this divorce settlement was his personal ticket out of debt. He thought he was about to get rich off my hard work. I took my seat next to Sarah. I did not glare at them. I did not show a single ounce of the profound, crushing agony of waking up every day this week without my daughter. I simply folded my hands on the table and waited. Judge Harrison called the court to order. He was a seasoned judge, a man who had presided over thousands of bitter divorces. He looked down at the massive stack of paperwork Marcus's legal team had submitted. Marcus had hired a notoriously aggressive attorney named David Sterling, a man known for dragging wealthy spouses through the mud until they settled out of court just to make the public bleeding stop. Sterling stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, and did not just present a case. He performed a highly choreographed character assassination. "Your Honor," Sterling began, pacing slowly in front of the judge. "My client is a devoted, hard-working father who has been subjected to unimaginable emotional and psychological abuse. We are asking the court to finalize the emergency ex parte order into permanent sole legal and physical custody of the minor child Zuri." Sterling paused dramatically, turning to point a finger directly at me. "Furthermore, due to the extreme financial disparity and the deliberate malicious termination of my client's access to marital funds, we are demanding a lump sum alimony payment of $50 million. A soft gasp echoed from the gallery. Vivian brought the handkerchief to her mouth, acting shocked by the number, but her eyes were glittering with absolute greed. Chloe leaned her head on Liam's shoulder, smiling brightly. $50 million. They had picked a number so astronomically high they thought it would cripple my empire and secure their generations to come. Sterling continued to spin a horrific, entirely fabricated fairy tale. He cited Vivian's fake church affidavits claiming I was dangerously unstable. He called me an erratic corporate tyrant who neglected her family to chase wealth and engage in illicit affairs with white shareholders. He painted Marcus as the dedicated, financially ruined victim of a cold capitalist machine. Judge Harrison flipped through the affidavits, his brow furrowing. He looked over his glasses at Marcus. Mr. Washington, considering the severity of your request to completely terminate the mother's custody rights, I want to hear from you directly regarding the environment in the home. Marcus stood up. He clasped his hands in front of him, putting on the performance of a lifetime. He looked up at the judge with fake glistening eyes, his voice thick with practiced sorrow. Your Honor, as a man, I had to lower myself to endure her madness to protect our daughter. Marcus sighed heavily, shaking his head, as if the memories were just too painful to bear. I gave up my own financial independence to support her career, and she repaid me by losing her mind and destroying our home. She threw my family out onto the street in a fit of manic rage. I am just trying to keep my little girl safe from a woman who has completely lost touch with reality. I could hear Chloe let out a soft, dramatic sniffle of support from the gallery. Liam leaned back against the wooden bench, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked down at me as if I were already a defeated animal locked in a cage. I could see the exact moment Liam and Marcus mentally spent my $50 million right there in the courtroom. They thought they had backed me into a corner so tight I would have no choice but to surrender my wealth to get my daughter back. Judge Harrison sighed, adjusting his glasses. He looked directly at me. The weight of the courtroom settled entirely on my shoulders. Ms. Washington, the judge, said, his tone grave. These are incredibly severe allegations supported by multiple sworn statements. Given the temporary order already in place and the extent of the financial demands your husband has requested, your counsel has the floor. Do you have a response, or is there a willingness to discuss a settlement today before we are forced to move this to a full evidentiary trial? Sarah sat perfectly still beside me, her hands resting lightly on the black leather briefcase. She did not speak for me. We had planned this down to the very second. I did not look at my lawyer. I did not look at Marcus's arrogant attorney. I slowly stood up. The entire courtroom fell dead silent. Vivian, Chloe, Liam, and Marcus held their breath, waiting for the angry black woman they had spent weeks inventing to finally snap, scream, and prove their affidavits right. Instead, I reached down and calmly adjusted the bottom button of my tailored crimson vest. I looked directly at Marcus, holding his gaze until he physically swallowed hard. Then I shifted my eyes up to the gallery, trapping Liam's pale, confident eyes with my own. Your Honor, I said. My voice was smooth, resonant, and entirely stripped of any emotion. I agreed to divide the assets. Marcus let out a sharp, audible breath of profound relief. Sterling smirked, picking up his pen as if ready to draft the settlement right then and there. In the gallery, Vivian lowered her handkerchief, a massive, victorious smile breaking across her face. Chloe literally bounced in her seat, gripping Liam's hand. They thought I had surrendered. They thought they had won the war. I raised my right hand, keeping my eyes absolutely locked on the white man in the gallery who had started all of this. But before we divide anything, I continued, my voice dropping to a chilling, razor-sharp pitch. We need to clarify the origin of the $3 million my husband intended to transfer to his brother-in-law Liam in Chicago. Objection! David Sterling barked, leaping from his chair so fast it nearly tipped backward. His face, previously set in a mask of smug satisfaction, was now flushed with sudden, aggressive irritation. Your Honor, this is a family court proceeding regarding custody and spousal support. The petitioner's business investments or family loans have absolutely no relevance to the mother's mental fitness or the division of marital assets. She is trying to distract the court. Judge Harrison raised a hand, silencing the attorney. He looked down from the bench, his sharp eyes narrowing as he assessed the sudden shift in the room's energy. He looked at me, then at the massive black briefcase resting on the table in front of my lawyer. I will determine what is relevant in my courtroom. Mr. Sterling, the judge stated firmly. He turned his attention back to me. Ms. Washington, you are making a very specific financial claim. How exactly does a failed business transfer relate to your husband's demand for $50 million and sole custody of your child? I did not flinch. I did not look at my husband, who was suddenly gripping the edge of his table, his knuckles turning white. I simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Sarah. The sound of the heavy metal latches on the black leather briefcase clicking open echoed like a gunshot in the dead silence of the courtroom. Sarah smoothly opened the lid and extracted 3 thick, meticulously organized binders bound with red legal tape. She handed the first binder up to the bailiff to pass to the judge, slid the second across the aisle toward a visibly sweating Marcus, and kept the third open in front of us. It is entirely relevant. Your Honor, I said, my voice echoing clearly off the high vaulted ceilings. My husband stands before you claiming financial ruin. He claims he was forced to sacrifice his independence and is now seeking $50 million of my company's assets to maintain his lifestyle and care for our daughter. But to divide an estate, we must first have a transparent accounting of all marital debts and liabilities. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the tension wrap around the throats of the people sitting behind me. 3 days ago, in a hotel suite in Chicago, Marcus attempted to finalize a secondary mortgage on my fully paid-off home. He intended to wire $3 million to a corporate entity named Horizon Tech, operated by his brother-in-law, Liam. They presented this to my face as a brilliant venture capital move, a seed funding round for a revolutionary Silicon Valley startup. Your Honor, this is hearsay, Sterling interrupted, sounding less confident and more frantic. My client is a respected financial director. If he made a bad investment, that is a civil matter, not a family court issue. It is not a bad investment, I corrected sharply, cutting the lawyer off completely. Because Horizon Tech does not exist. There is no software, there is no product, there are no engineers. I looked over my shoulder, locking eyes with Liam in the gallery. The arrogant, untouchable white man who had propped his feet on a table and told me I did not belong in the room was now paralyzed. His skin had turned a sickening shade of gray. Chloe was gripping his arm, looking back and forth between her husband and her brother, profound confusion finally piercing her delusion. I turned back to the judge. When my husband filed his emergency ex parte order claiming I was an unfit mother, he forced my hand. I hired an elite team of forensic accountants and private investigators to look into the man he was trusting with our family's future. What they found, perfectly indexed in the binder before you, is a labyrinth of offshore routing numbers, fake vendor invoices, and untraceable shell companies. Judge Harrison was already flipping through the pages of the binder. His eyes widened slightly as he scanned the highlighted bank transfer logs and the encrypted communication transcripts we had legally subpoenaed. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the rustle of the thick paper. Ms. Washington, the judge, said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a new dangerous weight. What exactly are you presenting to this court? Marcus stood up. He was shaking. Actual visible tremors were racking his body. Maya, stop, he pleaded. His voice was no longer the booming baritone of a wronged patriarch. It was the pathetic, high-pitched whine of a man who realized he had just walked willingly into a trap. Your Honor, she is fabricating this. She is just angry about the divorce. I ignored him completely. I stood tall, squaring my shoulders, holding the absolute authority of the room. I am presenting proof that my husband did not just make a poor financial choice, I stated clearly. It is highly relevant to this custody battle, Your Honor, because according to the forensic accounting records I just submitted to the IRS and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, that $3 million was not an investment. Marcus and Liam were operating an active interstate money laundering syndicate. Chaos erupted in the gallery. Vivian let out a loud, piercing shriek, dropping her lace handkerchief to the floor. Chloe began pulling on Liam's jacket, begging him to say it was a lie, but Liam was completely unresponsive. He was staring at the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom, his breathing shallow and rapid. David Sterling, the ruthless, high-priced attorney Marcus had hired, physically stepped away from his client. In the legal world, representing a difficult spouse in a divorce is just business. But sitting next to a man actively involved in a federal financial crime is a career-ending move. Sterling dropped his pen, raised his hand slightly, and looked at the judge as if to silently declare he had absolutely no knowledge of this. "Order!" Judge Harrison bellowed, slamming his wooden gavel down hard against the sounding block. "Order in this court right now." The judge pointed his gavel directly at Marcus. "Mr. Washington, sit down and remain silent." "Ms. Washington, you are stating for the official record that you have forwarded these financial documents to federal authorities." "I did not just forward them, Your Honor," I replied, a cold, victorious smile finally touching my lips. "I expedited them, because as a mother, I refuse to let my 8-year-old daughter be placed in the sole custody of a man who is about to be indicted for a federal felony." As the final word left my mouth, the heavy oak doors at the very back of the courtroom were violently pushed open. The loud, forceful bang of the wood hitting the walls echoed like a thunderclap, freezing every single person in the room. Even Judge Harrison stopped with his gavel suspended in the air. A team of stern, unsmiling men and women marched down the center aisle of the courtroom. They moved with absolute synchronized precision. They were not court bailiffs, and they were not local Atlanta police. They were wearing dark tactical pants, duty belts, and navy blue windbreakers. Printed across the back of those jackets in bright, unmistakable yellow letters was the acronym FBI. The lead agent, a tall man with a rigid jawline and absolutely no patience for the dramatic gasps echoing through the courtroom, walked straight past the gallery. He ignored Marcus, who was visibly trembling at the petitioner's table, and approached the bench. He pulled a folded document from his jacket and handed it directly to Judge Harrison. The judge adjusted his glasses and read the federal warrant. I watched the color completely drain from the judge's face. He looked up, his eyes darting toward Marcus, and then he gave a slow, grim nod to the federal agents. I remained standing perfectly still, completely unfazed by the armed officers now securing every exit of the courtroom. I glanced at the gallery. Vivian was clutching her chest, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to breathe. The terrifying reality of the situation had finally breached her fortress of delusion. I turned my attention back to the judge, keeping my voice steady, ensuring every single word was captured clearly by the court reporter. "Horizon Tech is not an innovative Silicon Valley startup. Your Honor," I stated. "It never was. For the past 3 years, that arrogant man sitting in the gallery has been using a fake technology company as a corporate shell. Its sole purpose was to launder millions of dollars for a highly illegal interstate gambling syndicate." A collective murmur of absolute shock swept through the room, but I did not stop. I stepped out from behind my table, moving closer to the center aisle so my husband could hear me perfectly. Liam needed a legitimate financial professional to clean his dirty money and make his fraudulent ledgers look spotless. He needed a proxy. More importantly, he needed someone who was deeply insecure, someone so desperate for validation from a white man that he would blindly risk his own family's safety to get it. Enter my husband, Marcus. As a senior financial director, Marcus used his credentials to manipulate corporate accounts and falsify asset declarations to legitimize Liam's illicit cash flow. He wanted to sit at the big table so badly that he willingly became a criminal accomplice. Marcus was hyperventilating now. He grabbed the edge of his wooden table, his chest heaving as he looked wildly at the federal agents moving into position behind him. He finally realized that the wealth he tried to steal from me was exactly what I had used to build his cage. When I sat in that taxi in Chicago 3 days ago, I did not just throw a temper tantrum over a forged mortgage. I continued, my voice ringing with cold authority. I executed a targeted financial strike. When I froze my assets and blocked that massive $3 million wire transfer, I completely severed Liam's dirty money supply chain. The sudden, unexplained disruption in that massive cash flow triggered immediate federal banking alerts. The system automatically flagged the accounts for highly suspicious activity. All my forensic accountants had to do was hand the FBI the translated ledgers on a silver platter. I turned my head to look directly at the gallery, but it was Liam who completely broke first. The illusion of his untouchable white privilege shattered the moment a federal agent stepped toward his row, Liam scrambled backward, knocking his wooden chair over with a loud crash. Chloe grabbed his arm, sobbing hysterically, begging him to tell the room it was all a misunderstanding. Liam violently shoved his wife away. He did not look like a visionary tech genius anymore. He looked like a cornered rat trapped in a sinking ship. The impending reality of a federal prison sentence stripped away every layer of his polite, progressive facade. Liam pointed a shaking, frantic finger directly at Marcus. "It was him!" Liam screamed, his voice cracking with pure hysterical panic. "I had nothing to do with the money transfers. It was this black guy. He set the whole thing up. He was the financial director. He moved all the cash. I do not know anything about a syndicate. He is trying to frame me." The absolute silence that followed his outburst was deafening. Vivian stopped crying, staring at the son-in-law she had worshipped and funded, horrified by the vile words leaving his mouth. Chloe sat on the floor of the gallery, completely paralyzed. Faced with the terrifying consequence of his own actions, Liam's deep, disgusting racism had clawed its way right to the surface. He did not see Marcus as a brother or a business partner. He saw him as a convenient scapegoat. He saw a black man he could easily throw to the authorities to save his own skin, desperately hoping the system would believe the white executive over the black financial director. Marcus stood completely frozen behind the petitioner's table. The words leaving Liam's mouth struck him harder than any physical blow could have. He had just heard the man he had idolized, the man he had desperately tried to impress by risking his own family's financial security, reduce him to a racial slur to save his own skin. It was this black guy. The words hung in the sterile air of the courtroom, exposing the deep, ugly truth Marcus had spent years ignoring. He had sold out his fiercely loyal, highly successful wife to buy a seat at a table with a white man who viewed him as nothing more than a disposable shield. The illusion of Marcus's carefully cultivated corporate success shattered instantly. The deep-seated insecurities that drove him to demand submission from me at home while shrinking in the presence of his arrogant brother-in-law had finally led him straight to a federal prison. The lead FBI agent did not hesitate. He did not care about Liam's frantic, sweat-drenched accusations, nor did he care about Marcus's sudden, horrified realization. The agent simply raised two fingers, signaling his tactical team to move in. Liam Hayes and Marcus Washington, the lead agent, announced, his voice carrying absolute, terrifying authority. "You are both under arrest for federal wire fraud, interstate money laundering, and criminal conspiracy." Two agents flanked Liam in the gallery. Liam immediately tried to weaponize the privilege he had relied on his entire life. He puffed out his chest, attempting to shake off the agent's hands, his voice rising in an indignant, panicked pitch. "You cannot do this to me. Do you have any idea who I am? I know the district attorney. I demand to call my legal counsel right now. You have the wrong man." The federal agents were entirely unimpressed. One agent swiftly grabbed Liam's arm, twisting it behind his back with practiced mechanical efficiency. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting closed around Liam's wrists echoed loudly across the silent courtroom. The arrogant tech bro, the man who had propped his expensive leather loafers onto my coffee table and told me I did not belong in the room, was forcefully shoved against the wooden bench. His knees buckled, and his expensive designer suit jacket bunched up awkwardly around his neck. He looked utterly pathetic. Chloe, completely unable to process the destruction of her false reality, let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She lunged forward, grabbing handfuls of Liam's jacket, her face streaked with black mascara and tears. "Liam, tell them it is a mistake," she wailed, pulling desperately at his restrained arms. "Tell them you are innocent. We have the country club gala to pay for. The investors are waiting for us." Faced with the terrifying reality of losing his freedom, Liam's mask of the loving, supportive husband dropped completely. He violently jerked his shoulder, physically shoving Chloe backward. "Get off me, you stupid woman!" Liam spat, his face twisted in a vicious, ugly sneer. "This is all your family's fault. If your idiot brother had properly hidden the routing numbers, the feds would have never flagged the accounts. You people ruined my life." Chloe stumbled backward from the force of his shove. She hit the wooden floor of the gallery hard, her designer dress bunching up around her knees. She sat there, on the cold marble, staring at the man she had worshipped, the man she had used to belittle her own culture and her own family. She finally saw him for exactly what he was, a ruthless, racist con artist who had used her as a convenient entry point to exploit her brother's financial credentials. At the petitioner's table, Marcus was not fighting the agents. He had lost the ability to speak. When the cold steel of the handcuffs locked tightly around his wrists, all the fight simply drained out of him. His custom-fitted charcoal suit bought to make him look like a noble, victimized father now looked exactly like what it was: a uniform for a convicted felon. David Sterling, Marcus's high-priced divorce attorney, took 3 rapid steps away from his client. He quickly began gathering his legal pads and shoving them into his briefcase. He wanted absolutely no physical proximity to a man being indicted for federal money laundering. Judge Harrison struck his wooden gavel hard against the sounding block, forcing the chaotic room back to order. Given the immediate federal indictment and arrest of the petitioner, Judge Harrison declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality, "The emergency ex parte custody order is hereby vacated in its entirety. Full legal and physical custody of the minor child, Zuri Washington, is immediately returned to the mother." Mr. Sterling, I suggest you advise your former client that he will need a very good criminal defense attorney because his time in family court is officially over. Marcus was forcefully pulled to his feet by the federal agents. As they turned him around to march him down the center aisle of the courtroom, he looked at me. Our eyes locked for one final, devastating moment. I did not glare at him. I did not offer him a triumphant smile or a look of pity. I gave him absolutely nothing. I looked at him with the cold, detached professionalism of a CEO observing a terminated employee. In that single quiet moment of eye contact, I watched Marcus process the absolute totality of his ruin. He had a brilliant, deeply devoted wife who had secretly paid off his debts and funded his luxurious lifestyle just to keep his fragile ego intact. He had a beautiful, healthy daughter and a magnificent home in Buckhead. He had everything a man could possibly ask for. But because he was too insecure to celebrate a successful black woman, because he desperately needed the validation of a white man to feel important, he had thrown it all away. Marcus was facing a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary. He had lost his lucrative corporate career. He had lost his luxury home. And by trying to use my daughter as a weapon to steal my money, he had ensured that he would never hold Zuri in his arms again. He lowered his head, tears of profound, inescapable regret finally spilling down his cheeks as the agents marched him out the heavy oak doors. Liam was dragged out right behind him, kicking and screaming obscenities until the doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice completely. The courtroom suddenly felt incredibly vast and empty. The judge recessed the court and retreated to his chambers. My lawyer Sarah quietly snapped her black leather briefcase shut, offering me a firm, respectful nod of victory. But the execution was not quite finished. Down in the gallery, only 2 people remained. Chloe was still sitting on the floor, weeping uncontrollably into her hands, completely shattered by her husband's brutal betrayal. And standing near the front row was Vivian, the proud, arrogant matriarch of the church. The woman who had publicly mocked me on the steps of the country club just last night was now trembling like a leaf in the wind. The sheer magnitude of the disaster had finally pierced her thick skull. Marcus was going to federal prison. Her precious son, her golden child, was a criminal. Liam's startup was a fraud. But worst of all, the realization of her own financial suicide suddenly hit her. Vivian had convinced Marcus to take out a massive predatory loan from a ruthless shadow lender with an astronomical interest rate just to rent out that country club ballroom. She had banked everything on Liam securing venture capital to pay it off. Now there was no startup, no investors, and no money. The violent loan sharks would be knocking on her front door by tomorrow morning, and she had absolutely nothing left to give them. Vivian's legs gave out. She collapsed from the wooden bench, her heavy beaded dress pooling around her on the cold marble floor. She did not just fall, she crawled. She dragged herself across the aisle, her hands slipping on the polished stone, moving directly toward the table where I stood. The woman who had told me I was not welcome in her tier of society was now physically on her hands and knees at my feet. She grabbed the hem of my crimson pantsuit, her fingers digging desperately into the fabric. She looked up at me, her face a horrific mask of smeared makeup, tears, and absolute crushing terror. "Maya, please," Vivian wailed, her voice cracking into a pathetic guttural sob. "You have to stop this. Tell your lawyers to drop the financial records. Tell the FBI it was a mistake. Spare him, please. He is Zuri's father. I beg you, Maya. You have all that money. You own that massive company. Please help us. The loan sharks are going to take everything. Our family is completely out of money." I looked down at the woman who had tormented me for nearly a decade. This was the same woman who sat in the front pew of her Buckhead church every Sunday, wearing wide-brimmed hats and judging the morality of everyone around her. This was the woman who had stood on the stone steps of the country club just 48 hours ago, flanked by security guards laughing in my face and telling me I was unfit to breathe the same air as her precious son and her visionary white son-in-law. Now, the heavy, intricate beading of her designer gown was scraping against the dirty marble floor of a criminal courthouse. She was sobbing so violently that her breath hitched in her chest. Her perfectly styled hair had fallen into her face in a damp, tangled mess. She tugged at the fabric of my crimson pantsuit with desperate, clawing fingers. She was not crying because she felt remorse. She was not begging because she suddenly realized the depth of the cruelty she had inflicted upon me. She was begging because the predatory loan sharks she had blindly trusted were coming to collect, and she finally understood that her golden child was heading to a federal penitentiary instead of a corporate boardroom. "Maya, you cannot do this!" Vivian choked out her voice, a ragged, frantic whisper. "We are your family. You have so much money. You can pay them off. You can fix this. Please just write a check. Do it for Zuri. She needs her father. You cannot let them take our home." I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel the familiar, suffocating urge to shrink myself and fix their catastrophic mistakes. That version of Maya, the quiet, accommodating wife who quietly paid off debts to protect the fragile egos of the people around her, was dead. She had died the moment Marcus tried to leverage my daughter's home to fund a racist con artist. I looked at Vivian's trembling hands clutching my clothes. I thought about the sheer audacity of her invoking my daughter's name. She had gleefully helped Marcus file false affidavits claiming I was mentally unstable. She had actively tried to rip Zuri out of my arms permanently, just to extort me for a $50 million settlement. And now, stripped of all her leverage, she dared to use that same child as a shield to beg for my wealth. I slowly reached down. I did not grab her hands aggressively. I simply placed my fingers over her wrists and applied a firm, unyielding pressure. I peeled her desperate, clawing fingers off the fabric of my suit one by one. I took a deliberate step back, physically severing the final tie between us. "You wanted me to act like a traditional wife, Vivian," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, absolute calm that cut through her hysterical sobbing. "You told me my place was in the background, submitting to the financial decisions of the men in charge. Well, Marcus made his financial decisions. He chose his investments. He chose his business partners. And now he gets to experience the traditional consequences of federal wire fraud." Vivian let out a strangled, breathless cry, reaching out for me again, but I was already out of her reach. "You tried to steal my daughter," I continued, ensuring every word landed with the heavy, undeniable weight of a gavel. "You tried to steal my home. You stood by and cheered while your son-in-law called me an angry black woman and told me I did not belong in the room. You told me I was nothing but a housewife who needed to go back to baking cookies." I looked down at her completely shattered expression. "Call an Uber, Vivian," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of mercy, "because my flight is taking off." I turned my back on her. I did not look at Chloe, who was still sitting frozen in the gallery, realizing she was now married to a destitute racist felon. I did not look at the empty table where my husband had sat just moments before. I simply squared my shoulders, lifted my chin, and walked straight down the center aisle of the courtroom. The sharp, rhythmic click of my stilettos echoed against the marble floor, a steady, powerful heartbeat marking the end of a war I had entirely won. I reached the heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom. I pushed them open with both hands, stepping out of the dark, oppressive atmosphere of the legal system and into the wide, expansive corridors of the courthouse. I kept walking. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, completely cutting off the sound of Vivian's desperate, echoing sobs. The silence of the corridor felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. I moved through the massive building, passing security checkpoints and crowded waiting areas. I did not stop until I reached the main exit. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped outside. The brilliant, blinding sunlight of a clear Atlanta afternoon hit my face instantly. The heavy, warm southern air wrapped around me, carrying the distant sounds of city traffic and the rustling of green leaves from the nearby plaza. I took a deep, unrestrained breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, unmistakable taste of absolute freedom. I stood at the top of the wide concrete steps leading down to the street. The camera of my life seemed to pull back in a smooth, sweeping motion, revealing the sheer magnitude of the world I had just reclaimed. Parked right at the curb, gleaming under the bright Georgia sun, was a pristine black Rolls-Royce. My lead attorney, Sarah, was standing by the open rear door, offering me a rare, genuine smile of profound respect. But my eyes did not linger on the luxury car or the victorious lawyer. Standing right next to the vehicle, holding a small bouquet of yellow daisies, was my 8-year-old daughter. Zuri was wearing her favorite bright pink dress, her hair styled in neat, beautiful braids. The temporary custody order had been completely obliterated, and my legal team had retrieved her the moment the judge struck his gavel. Zuri looked up and saw me standing at the top of the steps. Her eyes lit up with pure, unfiltered joy. "Mommy," she yelled, her bright voice carrying over the noise of the busy street. She dropped the flowers and ran toward me. I did not care about the expensive tailoring of my crimson suit. I did not care about maintaining a rigid corporate posture. I ran down the concrete steps, dropping to my knees, right as Zuri threw her arms around my neck. I picked her up, lifting her entirely off the ground, burying my face in her shoulder. She smelled like strawberries and sunshine. The crushing, terrifying agony of the past week completely dissolved into the warm, solid reality of holding my child against my chest. I held her so tightly, silently promising that no one would ever be allowed to use her as a pawn again. I spun her around, a bright, radiant laugh escaping my lips, echoing loudly in the open air. We walked toward the waiting car together, my arm wrapped securely around my daughter's shoulders. The heavy, dark chapter of Marcus and his parasitic family was officially closed, locked away behind federal indictments and insurmountable debt. I had dismantled the cage they tried to build around me, and I had done it using the very wealth and power they had so desperately tried to steal. Family is not the people who bleed you dry just because they share your DNA. They are not the ones who demand your silence to protect their fragile pride, or the ones who require your subjugation to fuel their own arrogance. True family is found in the people who stand by you when the doors fly open. And respect is never bought with submission. It is demanded, it is earned, and when necessary, it is taken by force. Today I did not just take back my house, I took back my entire sky.